Welcome to the Emotional Eating Unwrapped podcast. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, an emotional eating and weight loss coach for women looking to fall in love with eating, create healthy attachments with food, and lose weight sustainably. Hello, and welcome to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and today's episode is going to be about creating a life that you actually want to show up for and using your relationship with food and your patterns with eating as a way to almost guide you towards that and show you potentially where you might be able to enhance and, just amplify creating and living and becoming and being in the life that you want for yourself. So let's talk about how that actually happens, how food and your behaviors with food and your relationship with eating and food can actually be a portal towards creating a life that you actually want to show up for. So have you ever noticed how your relationship with food reflects how you're showing up in life? And I don't just mean whether you're eating healthy or not. I'm not just talking about the types of food that you decide to eat, right? Like clean eating or not clean eating, or vegetables over, convenience food. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the patterns behind your motivations for eating. More like that. So for example, maybe you avoid tough conversations the same way that you avoid sitting with a craving. So if you notice, it's like there's a certain pattern here, right? An inability to be with discomfort, or a resistance to discomfort. So that's a pattern that your relationship with eating and food is showing you. And it correlates, and it is similar to a dynamic that you might have interpersonally with people, right? And so maybe you people please at work the same way that you overextend yourself with food and eating. For example, eating what others want, right? You're sitting at a table and everyone else is eating something, or you're talking about where to go out to dinner or to lunch with friends, and everybody suggests something. Maybe deep down you don't really want to go there. It doesn't align with your goals, but you just go along, right? Instead of tuning into what you want or being willing to express yourself and say what you want to do. And another example is maybe you find yourself in that late night moment, right? Where you leave your bedroom and you walk downstairs, or you walk to your kitchen and you just eat when you're not hungry, and you think to yourself, why do I keep doing this? And so I want to offer a reframe, and I want to offer just a different way of looking at this. And I said it in the beginning just a few minutes ago, that your food habits are never really just about food. They're usually a mirror. They're usually a signal. And they're usually a reflection of how you're showing up in many other parts of your life. Which is why observing your behaviors with food in this way, and really being courageous to take this journey towards your relationship with food in this kind of self-discovery type of way is so powerful. And that's what I want to talk about today. How food can either keep us on autopilot, or it can actually become the key to creating a life that we actually want to show up for, that we actually enjoy living in. So let's get into the first topic, which is linking food habits to our life goals. Okay, so our eating patterns are often tied to more than hunger, which I talk about all the time. We've talked about a lot in different episodes. And our eating patterns, they often mirror our bigger life habits. So if you think about it, if you're numbing with food, where else in your life are you numbing? If you procrastinate with snacks, where else are you procrastinating? And if you give in, right? If you feel like you're giving in to food out of guilt, or out of like if you're like the example I gave earlier, where if you feel like you're eating something because someone is pushing it on you or everyone else is doing it, where else are you people pleasing? So I worked with a client one time and she was chasing a huge promotion. This is an example. And on paper, she had everything together. Okay. Like she totally, you look at her life and you'd be like, she has her shit together. But at night, she would binge, right? And I'm not saying every night was a full out, just stuff to the gills binge, but she would emotionally overeat. And it left her feeling just dissociated, exhausted, disconnected from herself, disconnected from her, just putting herself in this feeling of shame, right? It felt like a self-sabotage. And so when we dug deeper, she realized something, right? She realized that she didn't want the promotion, right? She was chasing this promotion, but she didn't even want the promotion, right? She wanted freedom, creativity, and balance. And the promotion would actually, though on the outside, it would look like maybe she was moving towards freedom because the promotion got more money and all that stuff. But it also came with a lot of this other responsibility and other time sucking activities that would take away from her true goals, right? Her true wants, her true desires. So the overeating and the binging, it wasn't about her. It wasn't a lack of willpower. It was her body saying, and her higher kind of self almost, right? They're not a higher self in the sense of like, what we often talk about, the higher self, but almost like this part of her that was just saying, and maybe it was actually a higher self version of her that was saying this isn't aligned. And so this is the shadow goals versus the true goals piece, where sometimes we're pursuing goals that don't even belong to us, right? They're cultural goals, or societal goals, they're generational goals, right? They're other people's expectations. And food and eating can expose this gap. So here's the invitation. The next time you reach for food you don't actually want, ask yourself, what am I avoiding? Right? What am I chasing? And is it aligned? Right? What am I avoiding stepping into? What am I avoiding seeing? And what am I chasing? And is it aligned? Because your food habits are not just about the substance on your plate. They're tied to your energy, your focus, and your ability to create and show up for the life that you're actually meant to live. Because the life that we're meant to live should leave us feeling fulfilled. We should get a sense of fulfillment from that. And so many women tell me that they feel like they're living on autopilot, doing things that they quote unquote should, serving everyone else. And then when the day finally slows down, when it finally gets quieter, food becomes the one reliable pleasure. And I call this the pleasure deficit, right? When joy, when play, when rest, creativity, right? Like a slower pace are absent from your day, oftentimes what happens is food rushes in to fill the gap. So imagine this, you spend all day in meetings, checking boxes, juggling responsibilities, doing carpool, soundboarding a million people's needs in your life. And by the time that the evening comes, and I'm not talking about like 6:30 before dinner, I'm talking about like 9:00 at night, right? When you're done with sort of all of the responsibilities of the day, you're tired, right? You're touched out, you're overstimulated, and the pint of ice cream or the the six pack of muffins, feels like the only thing that will make you feel grounded. It's the only thing that you can have as yours. And so it's not even about the sugar. It's not even about the food. It's not about you. It's not about your character. It's actually about finally letting yourself have pleasure. Right? It's letting yourself sit in an experience where you get to enjoy. Or there's the flip side, right? Where you're using it to numb, right? Where you say yes all day to everybody, to your boss, to your family, to commitments that you don't even want to do. And by the time that night comes around, food becomes the way your body says the no that you couldn't say during the day. Right? So that late night snack, that same pint of ice cream, that same 6-pack of muffins, it's a silent protest. Right? It's not about pleasure, it's about rebellion. It's about protest. And so this is the numbing as the silent no, right? Where you can't set boundaries in your own life, so food sets them for you. So you want to ask yourself, where am I starved for pleasure in my life? Right? When this type of stuff happens, these are the questions that you want to start to ask yourself. Where am I saying yes when I want to say no? Because the way that you eat, the way that you relate to food, create the dynamic with food and eating isn't separate from the way you live usually. It's usually a reflection of it. And so let's shift into a different lens, which is energy. Right? We only have a certain amount of energy in the day. And everybody has a different capacity for it, depending on whether you're extroverted, introverted, ambiverted, right? How do we source energy? How do we give energy? How do we receive energy? And we've often been taught that, when we talk about food now, restricting food, right? So we often see restriction as the shortcut to an outcome, right? If I eat less, I'll lose weight. If I eat less, if I stay disciplined, I'll prove my worth. If I eat less, my goals will come faster. But in reality, denying your body doesn't fuel you, it drains you, right? You might get a short-term result, but ultimately it will drain your life force. And I know if you're listening to this, you've had this experience. So what if you started experimenting with food not as this lever of punishment, but what if you started using it as, as fuel, right? Or as a service to yourself, right? As a generator for creating the life that you want. So asking yourself, which foods actually help me feel present, creative, alive? Which ones leave me foggy, anxious, or checked out? And starting to make your decisions based on feeling good, because that's your ultimate goal, right? Your ultimate goal is you feel good, you know that you deserve to feel good. And so I once worked with a woman who realized that her afternoon slump, right? And I get this question often too, like, why do I feel totally exhausted by 3 p.m.? She realized that her afternoon slump wasn't a personal flaw, but it was actually a pattern that she had in her eating routine, right? She very often would skip lunch. She'd work through the day without stopping. And by the mid-afternoon, her brain was begging for energy, right? She was like, the fog was coming on strong and the edginess was coming on strong. So no wonder she felt like she had no power over her need to go and get, chocolate bars and sugar by 3:00 in the afternoon. But once she started nourishing herself consistently, and I'm not talking about like the right foods, I'm talking about like making eating choices based on what helps her feel present, creative, and alive. There's no right or wrong to that. You need to develop what that is for yourself, right? And the eating strategy that I teach in my sober eating method totally helps people figure that out, right? But once she consistently started to make decisions that were based on something bigger than just, is this going to, is this going to be within my calorie count so that I could lose weight, or so that I have a certain result that's usually physical based. Once she started making decisions based on feelings, wanting to feel good, she was sharper, she was calmer, and she actually lost the weight. She actually lost weight. Her body released weight because her nervous system was more regulated. And this is the nervous system link. Okay, most of the time, discipline has nothing to do with weight loss, right? You have to obviously make decisions, but discipline and restriction has nothing to do with it. It's about whether your body feels regulated and resourced enough to, to be productive in a way that not just gets you a result, but allows for your life to feel good. So your body doesn't have to hold on to weight as some sort of protection and survival. Right? I mean, this is the dichotomy of this whole thing. So being able to have your routines, your rituals, seeing food as service to yourself, right? Not as something you have to manage or control, right? And really starting to partner with food as a way to create your best life, because it's serving you, it's fueling you. And that's how you could start to feel like you're not at the mercy of these energy dips or of these confusing cravings that arise out of nowhere. Okay. So awareness, everything that we talked about, everything we talked about today is really important. It's super impactful. And if you're listening to this, I have no doubt that you're probably saying to yourself, and some of these topics that we've talked about, like, yes, this is me. But I want to just share again something that I really just repeat over and over again. Awareness is powerful. Having insight, having awareness, having an aha moment, feeling like, yes, this is me. Now I understand. That's super, super key. But it only matters if you turn it into action. It only matters if you turn it into action. So what you want to do is you want to map your food patterns towards your life goal. So if you're procrastinating on something, whether it's writing a book, and I actually did have a client that was procrastinating writing a book and made that connection, right? Realized that her snacking, right? Her kind of just feeling of like constant emotional overeating, feeling like she had no control and being confused as to why. She realized that her procrastination and the snacking at night, they were connected. They were connected. And so you also want to celebrate small wins, right? Choosing to eat with presence, right? Choosing to pay attention to what you're eating, make decisions, stay attuned to your motivations for eating, your sensations physically as you're eating, and making decisions about how you're going to continue eating, right? That's eating with attention and intention like that. That is a muscle that you have to build. And it's uncomfortable at first because there's no real blueprint. Everybody is very different. So you have to be willing to put yourself out there and get feedback from yourself back to collect the information you need to feel more confident in your decisions. It's the same thing as having a hard conversation or showing up for a workout. And, having those actions lead to greater satisfaction in your life, right? We don't 100% know what the result or outcome is going to be immediately. We're not going to feel confident immediately, but the more we do it, the more reps we have, the more verified evidence of what the outcome is going to be, and the more confident we're going to be to show up to that, right? So the more confident, you'll get more confident with your eating choices and knowing that it's going to work out for you and you're going to feel good, the more you do it. Right in the beginning, it might not be, but the more you do it, you will. The same thing with a hard conversation. You might be so nervous at first that someone's going to get mad at you, or like it's going to sever the relationship or something like that. But the more you do it and you see that doesn't happen, you feel more confident. The same thing with a workout, right? The more you start, right, you go into a workout, you want a result. At first, you don't know what it's going to be like. You don't know how sore you're going to be. You don't know the results you're going to see. But then eventually it starts to be predictable. It starts to be reliable. But you have to take the action to get to the place where these things can feel predictable and reliable. And then you want to reframe slip-ups, quote unquote, as data, right? So if you overeat after a stressful day, it's not a failure, right? It's just information, right? What support did I need that day that I didn't give myself? What was the data that I could take away from this? And here's one of my favorite tools, right? The future you litmus test. Okay, I love this. So when you're about to eat in a way that feels out of alignment for you, pause and ask yourself, what would the version of me that I want to become choose here? Right? Not from like a bullying place, not from like a judgmental place or a condescending place, but from a vision, right? From a worthy place, right? So if the future version of you is creative, vibrant, focused, alive, present, grounded, relaxed, how does she nourish herself, right? How does she relate to her eating experiences? Because the truth is, every time that you engage with food, it actually can become, if you see it this way, a rehearsal for the life you want to create. Okay, so here's the takeaway, right? Your eating habits are never just about food, right? They're about alignment. They're about integrity. They're about how much pleasure, attention, and truth you're allowing into your life. Because your dynamic with food and eating tells the story, right? Where you're chasing goals that aren't yours, where you're saying yes when you really mean no, where you're numbing instead of feeling, where you're starving for pleasure and enjoyment, and where you're already showing up with integrity and vision. So when you're feeling those cravings or you're having these experiences with eating where you're eating on autopilot or emotionally overeating or having binging episodes, instead of asking, why can't I control myself? What's wrong with me? Ask, what is this telling me about my life, about my patterns? Because when you start to align your dynamics with eating and food with your bigger goals, right? Not perfection, not restriction, but alignment, everything changes. And you can create a life that you actually want to show up for and actually be embodied in the version of yourself that lives that life. All right. So thank you so much for listening today. Thank you for all of your attention. Thank you for your likes and your subscribes on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. And if you listen to us on Spotify and Apple, please like and subscribe there as well. And just a reminder that we do a monthly giveaway. So if you do leave us a review and a rating on Apple, you can send a screenshot of that to @BeWellByAK on Instagram with your email address so we can email you if you win our giveaway. You can also send that screenshot to podcast@BeWellByAK.com. And thank you so much. And I will see you next time on Emotional Eating Unwrapped.